It seems that the Rebbe spoke at this time about abandoning us, but the idea pained him since he had been looking forward so much to Rosh Hashanah. Indeed, throughout the entire summer in Uman, he was yearning and longing to be at the gathering of his followers on Rosh Hashanah, and blessed be God for the Rebbe's love, mercy, and compassion on us and on all of Israel, that he did not leave us but remained with us throughout the summer. And for Rosh Hashanah, we heard a most wondrous and awesome lesson that Rosh Hashanah, which was the last Rosh Hashanah of his lifetime. Thus the Rebbe also departed this world in our vicinity in Uman, and his holy legacy remains with us for all eternity. How can we ever repay God for all his kindness towards us? I have recently heard from one of the Rebbe's followers in Ladazin, who heard directly from his holy mouth when he was speaking in Ladazin at the onset of his illness, that the Rebbe's death from his illness was inevitable. The Rebbe also spoke at that time about his gravesite and said, "I would like to remain among you, said that you come to visit my gravesite." These words of the Rebbe's wish to remain among us are very dear to me, for all the worlds are dependent upon the fact that he remained among us. The Rebbe once spoke about certain people who used to visit him in Uman. These people considered themselves wise and would relate to the Rebbe some of the foolish stories that appear in their literature. The Rebbe commented, "Very soon they will have told me everything. Then they will have nothing left to tell me." In this connection, he told the parable of someone who was attacked by a robber. The robber demanded his money, and the victim gladly gave him all his money, hoping thereby to save his life. But the victim then said to the robber, "How can I return home without any money? I have been traveling about, away from home for so long. And now, how can I return home empty-handed? Therefore, I beg you, please shoot a few bullets in my hat so that I will be able to show that I was robbed." The robber did so. Then the victim asked the robber to shoot in the corner of his clothes, which he also did. Then he asked him to shoot in another few places until finally the robber that he had no more bullets. The victim then said, "Now that your bullets are finished, come here." The victim then took the robber by the neck, called for help, and overpowered the robber. The moral of the story was evident to all those who were there when the Rebbe told it. The Rebbe occasionally did things that seemed extremely strange to people who misinterpreted his actions. Each one deluded himself into thinking he knew the Rebbe's real motivations in doing certain things, such as his moving to Uman. Each one concocted different nonsense to explain the Rebbe's motivation in this move. The truth is, though, that his motivations were very sublime, as can be understood from what we said earlier. He certainly had no motivations for personal benefit and acted completely for God's sake. Regarding this, the Rebbe said it is very beneficial to cast the fool within oneself into the world. Everyone tries to fool the other, but ultimately that other is oneself. One can only fool oneself. The one who refrains from fooling oneself so fools the entire world. This is because others will misinterpret his motivations without his intending to fool them, for they fool themselves, each one in a different way. In other words, every human being fools themselves regarding their own motivations, for no one really acts completely altruistically without some personal vested interest. Therefore, someone who does act completely altruistically without any motivation for personal benefit and does not deceive himself at all in any way will be perceived by others as acting very strangely, for no one will be able to grasp his true sublime intentions. This person casts the fool within himself to the world, for he did not want to fool himself, which is why the world misperceives him. Understand this well, for it is difficult to explain it in writing. On another occasion, the Rebbe made fun of the various mistaken interpretations that people give to his actions, each one according to his own personal ideas. He said, "Riley, it seems as if grasping my rationale is quite easy." By this he meant that the accusations are based on the ludicrous assumption that anyone can easily know his intentions. The Rebbe once spoke about dressing respectably, that an upright person should dress as respectably as he can, and certainly not in an undignified way. Even the tzaddik only attracts people because of the way of his dress, and people see how respectably he dresses himself. That raises his honor in people's eyes, and they want to become his followers. If he would not dress respectably, people would think nothing of him. Even God dressed himself in Egypt, the Rebbe said. The entire story of the Exodus is completely a story about clothing. God had to clothe himself, so to speak, in the events that took place in Egypt until the people began to know God himself, continually coming to know his greatness more and more. Initially, though, they would never have come to know him without garments, without all the events that took place in Egypt which correspond to garments. On Shavuot, shortly after his arrival in Uman, the Rebbe did not reveal a Torah lesson. Instead, he said in jest, "You are not such great sinners that I need to teach you Torah." He continued to explain that there are parts of the Torah that are only revealed by way of sins, such as the episode of the golden calf and other similar sections in the Torah. Indeed, the sages say that if not for the golden calf, we would only have today the 5 books of Moses and the book of Joshua. For all the rest of scriptures were only necessary because of the people's sins and the need to rebuke. Then, as Rashi HaKadosh comments on the aforementioned teaching of the sages, hence the Jewish people's sins evoked the revelation of entire sections of the Torah, specifically all the books of the prophets and the writings. On the 10th of Iyar, in the house of Rabbi Nachman, Natan and Uman, the Rebbe said that in the middle of the prayer, "Restore our judges." Rabbi Nachman Natan came to his mind. That is in order to rectify his soul. The Rebbe spoke at the table. It was the 12th of Tammuz. The Rebbe spoke at the table about his actions. He expressed amazement about his always acting in ways that seem strange and odd to people. Specifically about how he is always traveling about from place to place. What was he lacking in Medvedka? Why didn't he remain there? We had been able to live in peace and tranquility, but he didn't want to live in peace and tranquility, so he left there and settled in Zlatopolia, where the great dispute broke out against him, from which he suffered greatly. Then he left there and settled in Breslov, and then he left Breslov and settled in Uman. But even in Uman, he did not choose to live with a God-fearing person, as would have seemed appropriate, but specifically chose to board where he had. Why was he always doing such strange and odd things? He wondered about himself. I then said to the Rebbe, "But isn't that why Moses specifically married the daughter of Jethro?" What I meant was that God's way is always to reconcile two opposites, which is why Moses intentionally bonded with and married specifically the daughter of Jethro, who was a pagan priest, and which is why the Rebbe had to connect with such people. Then the Rebbe said to the people around the table, "Have you heard what he has asked?" He has asked a very good question. Then he added, "You are totally unable to be witnesses." We had no idea what witnessing he was talking about, so he explained that he wanted to obligate himself before witnesses, that he would answer this question, but that in the meantime he was obliged to take them as witnesses, explaining, "Since we can anyway, not right now, but you will probably remember that Shabbat morning," he continued speaking about the question, repeating that I asked a very big question. Then he asked, "Do you have an answer?" I said that regarding Moses, it was not a question for me at all. "So you are answering one question with another," he said, adding that I had come upon the same thought that he had. He said that for quite some time he had been thinking about this, praying and begging to find an answer, and now he said to those present, he had asked this question. The rest of you, though, don't know what it's all about. I, though, have been thinking about it for quite a long time, and have prayed on this issue. Not only the standard morning, afternoon, and evening prayers, but also many of my personal prayers. I had wanted that an answer be revealed to me from heaven, and that I hear a voice directly from heaven telling me an answer, for he didn't want to receive an answer from a human being, and he lowered his request and sought to be revealed an answer through some other spiritual agency, and then at least through wild beasts or bird, but he did not want to receive an answer from a human being in any event. He had still not been answered. Then he said to us, "You are on a very low spiritual level. I have no one to talk to. Nevertheless, even though you don't see, your souls see. I therefore take as witnesses." Saying in Yiddish, "I relate to your not conducting the sentence," or he probably meant with our souls. He spoke a lot in a similar vein at both the evening and morning Shabbat meals at the table, highly praising my question. The deeper meaning of all this, though, remains a mystery. I heard from one of the Rebbe's followers that when he traveled with the Rebbe from Uman to Trevotza during the summer of 55-70, the Rebbe spoke to him about himself, saying, "I am amazed that though we have no place at all in this world, nevertheless, wherever we go, we have a place, and everything belongs to us." The follower asked him, "But doesn't the entire world have a portion in you?" In answering him, the Rebbe shared with him several thoughts. Among them, the renowned leaders of today of Lostach have no idea at all of what I am doing here in Uman. If only they knew how Great and precious are the novelties, the combinations, and the delight on high being generated by what is happening here literally every moment, and by the prayers that are constantly arising from here, novelties and recombinations that are constantly becoming more and more precious and wondrous. The Rebbe expounded greatly along these lines with awesome words in a very eloquent way. The gist of his holy words are as following. Any gathering of the Jewish people is called holy stones. As the verse says, holy stones are poured out. Now, 2 stones built 2 houses, and 3 stones built 6 houses, and 4 stones built 24 houses. As the Sefer Yetzirah says, in the houses correspond to prayer. My house is a house of prayer. However, when the Jewish people gather together and another Jewish soul is added to them, a completely new dimension is added, a completely new combination comes into existence, and completely new houses are created. As long as there are only 2 stones, the combinations and the houses were only made by 2 stones. But with the additional stone, completely new houses came into existence. And similarly, each time that a new stone is added, the houses increase exponentially. As the Sefer Yetzirah states, that such 6 would give hundreds of houses, and eventually would have no way of even expressing the numbers or even grasping them. Reflect upon the great joy, the new combinations, the precious and awesome prayers coming into existence at every single moment, as a result of each and every Jewish soul, specifically by way of the great Tzaddik who is involved in gathering in the souls of Israel and bringing them back into the realm of holiness. For there are certain souls that are as stones cast into the gutter. Holy stones are poured out as the corner of every street. However, when another stone is added and more houses are created, then those holy stones that are cast aside are gathered into new houses. Then the Rebbe added, for a long time now I have been instrumental in Jewish prayers. Is it not appropriate that the tzaddikim should look into themselves and ask who it is who is praying and with whom they are praying? In fact, whatever gesture anyone makes during prayer, even that of the great sinner, is all of my doing. The Rebbe added that this is one of his greatest secrets. The Rebbe, however, did not explain what all this has to do specifically with Uman, but from what has been said here earlier regarding what he alluded to us about his settling in Uman, we can understand a bit. Countless souls were martyred in Uman, and the slaughtering of a Jew itself corresponds to holy souls being poured out. The issue, though, still remains a hidden mystery, and no one really knows anything about it. Fortunate is the one who will be privileged in the future to perceive the greatness of the Rebbe and the secret of his actions, the things that he did and accomplished in this world, amazing things that remained hidden from human understanding. Everything done for the sake of God's great and holy name. Then the Rebbe concluded, fortunate are you that you have such a Rebbe, I envy you. Now though it will be very difficult for others to become followers. The Rebbe once said, initially the world was chaotic, then God created an orderly world. It is unclear to what context the Rebbe said. The Rebbe said, these frivolous people who come into me are already filled with remorse, but they are totally unaware of their own remorse. The Rebbe once spoke to me in Uman about his moving there. There is a path from a house to the outside, from there to the hill, from there past the small river and the bridge, from there to the house of Reb Shimon, from there to the house of Reb Zelik, and from there to Uman. Indeed, this is the path the Rebbe had taken to Uman. When the fire first broke out on Friday night, the Rebbe fled immediately amidst the tumult caused by the fire. He had been sitting there at his Shabbat meal, saying that he knows nothing, declaring, I swear on the holy Shabbat that I know nothing. When all of a sudden there were shouts about a fire, he corresponded by saying, already? He then fled immediately from his house to the outside, running to the vicinity of the synagogue. A fur coat was brought to him so that he not catch cold, for he was already very weak at the time. Then he crossed the little river on foot through the water and climbed up to the high hill, where he sat down and watched the entire fire until his house was burnt down. The Torah scrolls, though, had been removed from the synagogue and study hall, were lying near him, and nearby were also several others who had fled there with him. We managed, thank God, to rescue all of the Rebbe's belongings from his house. Nothing was left behind. Near daybreak on Shabbat morning, I arrived at where he was. He was sitting there joyfully, just sitting and looking upon the town and his house that had burnt down. I then brought him to a house at the edge of town that had been spared from the fire, walking with me alongside the little river flowing through the fields. He said, "Who would have imagined that we would be walking before the daybreak of a Shabbat morning along this path through the fields?" We then went to the house of Reb Shimon, where he remained for the rest of Shabbat. On Sunday, he moved to the house of Reb Zelig, which was at the opposite edge of town and was also spared from the fire, where he remained all day Sunday until word came from Uman that he could go there. Throughout his moving about, while all his belongings and possessions were scattered around in the house he was at, and when the word came to him from Uman that he could go there, I was with him. When that word came, he became visibly shaken, and his face became filled with great emotion. On Tuesday, he moved to Uman. It was on this journey that he said the above. There is a path. He was alluding to the story in the Master of Prayer about the hand upon which are engraved all the paths of the world. He meant to say that his roundabout path from his house in Breslov to Uman is also certainly engraved on that hand. From the house to outside, from there to the hill, from there to the houses, and from there to Uman. Fortunate is the one who will be privileged to understand this in the future, for his journey concludes awesome secrets along each and every step. All his holy journeys embodied sublime secrets, and all the more so this last journey upon which he embattled in order to die in Uman. No thought can contain the awesome and countless secrets that were embedded in each and every step and in each and every episode and factor related to his passing. Shortly after he arrived in Uman, someone who was a peripheral follower of his came and apologized that the community had not come to greet him, giving several excuses. The Rebbe responded, "I am not looking for new followers. If my present followers will be upright people, that would be good. But if not, I alone am enough." The Rebbe once told the Maggid of Chervosa while he was ill with the tuberculosis from which he died, "If people knew how much they need me, they would all prostrate themselves before God and beg him that I return to my health. The entire world needs me so much that it cannot exist without me." In Uman, after the Friday night Kiddush and Shabbat Nachamu, the Rebbe gave a lesson about his simplicity, that is, about his acting sometimes like a simple person. He said that at such times he uplifts himself with his journey to the land of Israel. Then he said that he was now a simple, God-fearing person and happy. Fortunate are we. He said that God has acted kindly toward us and found us worthy of the sanctity of Jewishness. He also spoke about how happy he was to have had the privilege of reaching the Holy Land. He had endured countless obstacles, distractions, doubts, and arguments surrounding the journey, besides financial difficulties, yet he overcame them all and accomplished this goal completely. "I fully believe," he said, and also knew much about this, that all gestures, thoughts, and all types of actions a person makes for a holy endeavor, none of this is ever lost. Everything is recorded on high for the good. Fortunate are those who are able to jump over all obstacles and complete some good deeds. He was greatly elated at the time and rebuked Reb Naftali for his embarrassment and not wanting to sing. "What do we have to be embarrassed about?" asked the Rebbe. "The entire world was only created for us, Naftuli. We have no reason to be ashamed. It was what created for us." He was in great joy. The Rebbe initially stayed in the house of Nachman Natan upon arriving in Uman. He remained there from the 5th of Iyar until the day after Shavuot. Throughout this time which I was with him, he kept asking that we find him an apartment in which he could stay with his family. We searched for him throughout the city for some appropriate apartment, but no apartment met his wishes and needs. Suddenly, somebody came and offered his apartment for free. It was a beautiful apartment and very beneficial for the Rebbe, for it had many rooms and a garden outside the windows, which was very good for the Rebbe's illness, which required a spacious apartment with a lot of fresh air. However, the Rebbe was unable to move into it at the time, and instead moved after Shavuot in the house of Rabbi Yosef Shmuel, which had been rented for him, and remained there for a few weeks. The Rebbe told me, the sudden offer of an apartment for free from a total stranger will be another story to be told in future times. When the Rebbe told me about the importance of hitbodedut and talking with God, I asked him, "But isn't a human being a free-willed creature?" He didn't answer me explicitly, but only said offhandedly, "Nevertheless." What he meant was that although he cannot explain it completely, nevertheless, one must act upon it. I was unable to question him any further, for I knew that this question can actually be asked of all prayers, and the sages instituted to recite in request of God's assistance for our repentance and coming closer to him. The Rebbe said that during hitbodedut with God, one should say, "Today I will begin to bond with you." and each time one should begin again anew, for all subsequent developments follow the beginning. Even the philosophers state that the beginning something is half the job. Hence, one should always begin again, for all things were good until then, now they will be even better. And if things were not good up until then one surely needs to make a new start. The Rebbe was once talking with us at length about Histaphut, praising the practice in a superlative way. He added that he cannot instruct people to do this for more than a limited time during the day, for one cannot burden them more than that. But the truth is that one should practice Histaphut for the entire day. The Rebbe then spoke about this at very great length, and we heard many beautiful ideas from him about the greatness of Histaphut. For instance, he said one can even talk a gun out of shooting. Speech has such power. Understand this well. He spoke about this for an entire day. Fortunate is the one who follows his practice. On the Rebbe's last Rosh Hashanah, his grandson Yisrael, the son of Rabbi Yitzhak Isaac of Kremenchuk, was with him. The boy was still quite young, only about 3 or 4 years old, and the Rebbe was already very ill with his tuberculosis. Since this was very shortly before his departing, he said to his grandson, "Pray to God on my behalf that I return to my health." The boy answered, "Give me your watch and I'll pray for you." "Have you seen?" exclaimed the Rebbe. "He is already a Rebbe, for he is telling me to give him something so that he should pray for me." The Rebbe gave him the watch. The boy took it, walked away, and said, God, allow my grandfather to be well." Everyone began to laugh, but the Rebbe said, "That's how one should ask of God. How else can one pray to God?" He meant to say that the essence of prayer is to speak to God with complete innocence, like a child speaks to his father, like one would speak to a close friend. Even if one is unable to say in Histaphut more than Master of the Universe, this too is very good. He also said that one can sense if another person practices Histaphut. The Rebbe instructed someone to practice Histaphut once in the morning and another time in the evening. Another time the Rebbe asked one of his followers if he's accustomed to groan and sigh during Histaphut. The man answered in the affirmative, and the Rebbe questioned him further if he groans and sighs from the depth of his heart. The Rebbe then answered, "If my hands are on the table when I groan and sigh, I am then unable to lift my hands off the table for some time until my strength returns to me." The Rebbe once told Reb Shmuel Isaac, the Rebbe once held Reb Shmuel Isaac over his heart and said, "For a bit of blood in the hollow of the heart will you forfeit this world and the next? Be accustomed to sighing a lot until you empty it out and subdue the negative tendencies and achieve my heart is empty within me." While the Rebbe was once speaking with Rabbi Yaakov Yosef about serving God as he always did, he told him a parable. A king sent his son far away to study. The son eventually returned home after he had acquired a lot of knowledge. Sometimes later, the king instructed the son to take some very huge stone that was as big as a grinding stone up to the attic. The son, of course, was unable to lift it since it was so heavy, and he was very upset that he was unable to fulfill his father's wish. The father eventually told the son what his real intention was. "Did you really think that I expect you to lift up this heavy stone as it is? Can you possibly do this even with all your knowledge? Rather, my intention was that you take a strong hammer and break the stone into small pieces so that you will then be able to take all the pieces up to the attic." The same is true, the Rebbe concluded, regarding God's instructions that we lift up our hearts to God in heaven. Our hearts are like a very heavy stone. It is completely impossible to lift it up to God. The only thing we can do is take a hammer and smash our heart of stone to pieces. Only then we will be able to lift it. The hammer is the power of speech. Understand this. The Rebbe once spoke about the need to devote a lot of time reciting psalms, other supplications, and to practicing Histaphut. Rabbi Yudel asked him, "How does one attain a heart?" He meant to ask, "How can one become able to speak with an aroused heart?" The Rebbe answered, "Tell me, which tzaddik ever aroused your heart? The main thing is just to say the words with your mouth." The Rebbe meant by using one's speech to pray and beg profusely, the heart will automatically become aroused. While one of the Rebbe's followers was still in his youth, the Rebbe instructed him to speak a lot to each of his limbs individually during Histaphut. He should explain to each of his limbs how all bodily passions are meaningless, since eventually everyone dies. The body will be brought to the grave and all his limbs will decay and disintegrate and so on. This follower followed the Rebbe's advice for a while, and after some time excused himself to the Rebbe during a conversation with him that his body does not hear or feel any of his words or arguments. The Rebbe said to him, "Be strong in this practice, don't be lax. You will eventually see what effects the words will have." The man followed the advice and eventually reached such a level that each of his limbs so completely surrendered to his words that its very life force left it and completely lost its strength and sensation. The man experienced this for himself in his external limbs, such as his fingers and toes, but when it came to his inner organs upon which his life is dependent, such as the heart, he had to greatly limit his words so that his life would not leave him altogether. I heard this man was once speaking with some followers of his own about how this world is meaningless and what purpose is there in all the bodily matters. Suddenly, in the midst of speaking, he actually fainted and began to die, and it was only with great effort that he was brought back to life. He then commented that he attained the level only through the Rebbe's holiness. Whenever he reflects upon the ultimate suffering of the soul and the ultimate end of all mundane affairs, all his limbs, even the small toe on his feet, feel as if they are actually lying in the grave and decaying. Only with great effort is he able to revive himself. Some followers who were very ill came to the Rebbe, and he saw that they would not survive. He tried to lift their spirits by saying, "What do you have to worry about death? The next world is much nicer than this one." We were once standing before the Rebbe on the Sunday after Shabbat Nachem. A funeral procession was then passing by his window, and a crowd was walking after the deceased, crying and wailing as people do. The Rebbe said the deceased is probably laughing at those who are weeping. Weeping over someone leaving this world is tantamount to saying to him, if you would have been better, had you remained in this world for many more years, endured many more troubles in this world, and suffered more of the bitterness of this world. I heard in the name of Rabbi Yudel, who heard from the Rebbe a parable of a king who banished his son. Regarding the importance of praying to alleviate another's distress, I heard from Rabbi Yitzhak David Chervotza a similar parable that he heard from Rabbi Yudel. The Rebbe told Rabbi Yudel that praying to alleviate another's distress is a remedy for haughtiness. Rabbi Yudel asked him, on the contrary, it would seem that this would only add to my haughtiness. If I am praying for someone, it must be better than he is. The Rebbe explained it with a parable. A king was once angry at his son and banished him. The son later went and appeased his father, and the father allowed him home. But then the son again did something against the king's wish, and the king again banished him, only for the son to again appease his father, and the father again allowing him back. This went on several times. One time, after the son's misbehavior, the father became extremely angry and thought to himself, what use of continuing to banish him? Eventually my anger subsides, and then he comes around and appeases me. I don't want this anymore. I will thereby banish him in a way that he will not be able to come and appease me. What did the king do? He appointed one of his officers and instructed him not to allow his son entry when he returns to appease him. Indeed, the son returned several times to appease his father, but the officer would not let him in, following the king's instructions. This happened several times. But the officer saw the son's great yearning to return to his father and how distraught he was in being unable to do so and appease him. So the officer thought to himself, if the son is so distressful, I assume that the king is also suffering from his son not being able to come into him. For the greater the desire of the desirer, the greater the desire that is aroused in the desired. The officer had great pity on both of them, and he also suffered personally from it, feeling that he was in the case. I am the one standing between them and causing such anguish to the king and the prince. So the officer thought to himself, there must be some way to allow the prince to appease the king, for the king would have certainly not done such a thing to cause his son himself such ongoing suffering from their being permanently separated. And after further reflection, he came to the conclusion, it all depends on me. I must go to the king myself and beg on the prince's behalf, so that the king forgives him and takes him back again. So the officer went and told the king how much the prince yearns to return and begged the king to forgive his son. The king was immediately appeased and restored the prince to his original status. The lesson is obvious. Every individual must say to himself, the entire world was created just for me, and I must seek to rectify it. Thus, when someone else is suffering, whether materially or spiritually, everyone must say to themselves, it is certainly on account of my own sins. I am the one standing between the King of Kings and the world, for God always wants to benefit his children. I am the one blocking this. What I must do is beg God on the other's behalf. Doing this will certainly not engender haughtiness, for haughtiness is when one feels superior to the next person for possessing something that the other does not possess. But if one thinks that the reason why one's lacking something material or spiritual is only because they are standing between that other person and God, who always wants to send his bounty, then one will surely not become haughty. On the contrary, this will break one's haughtiness and bring one to true humility, as well as benefit the other person.